You are listening to Travel with the Backpacking Housewife podcast. I'm your host, Janice Horton. Welcome to episode 5, in which I'm going to share with you a very special destination that is not only very close to my heart, but also close to me physically, as right now I'm living in Scotland. And right now, as we welcome the warmer and longer days of summertime and the easing of travel restrictions here in the UK, I know that Scotland will be a top destination for many of you this year. And that's why, to inspire you further, over the next few weeks of my podcasts, I want to explore lots of my favourite parts of Scotland with you. Wonderful places and historic castles, and I'll even be hosting an episode discussing what to pack and bring with you on your Scottish holiday, because of course, even in the summer, the weather here can throw all 4 seasons at you, and often all on the same day. In this episode, I want to tell you about a secret and very special place I know in Scotland. It's a place with an incredible history and with astonishing treasures of real national importance. And yet it's a sleepy and unassuming place. It's a village small enough to be known as a hamlet, with an ancient church, a historic graveyard, a war memorial, and a collection of dwellings, all nestling deeply in the wildest of countryside amongst the heather-clad Lowther Hills in the Southern Uplands of Scotland. The village is called Durisdeer. And how do I know about this special and secret place? Well, the answer is that I used to live in Durisdeer myself. I lived there for 27 years. It's where my husband and I bought a once derelict shepherd's cottage to renovate and make into our family home. It's where we brought up our 3 children. It's where we lived amongst a close-knit community of friends and neighbours. And for that reason, this beautiful place called Durisdeer will always have a special place in my heart. Durisdeer is where we've spent a significant and very special time in our lives before our children grew up and we eventually found ourselves as empty nesters, selling our home in 2014 to become wandering world travellers. The people and the church at Durisdeer have played a key part in our lives. And the church at Durisdeer is also a key part of the secrets buried there and the treasures of national importance that I'm about to share with you. While I lived at Durisdeer, the heart of the village, and therefore the community, was always focused around the church. This was undoubtedly all down to the wonderful late Reverend William Bill Scott and his beloved wife Nesta Scott. Reverend Scott was minister at Durisdeer Church for 55 years. Back then, he and Nesta lived in the manse at the centre of the village. With the help of Bill and Nesta and the village congregation, and whether you attended the church or not was not a requirement, and with the local Scottish Women's Institute, affectionately known as the Rural, of which I was a member, we would help organise many of the community activities and the village celebrations throughout the year. We'd attend harvest festivals, Christmas services and nativity plays, and while Reverend Bill Scott held the service in the church, the Sunday school would take place in the Laird's Loft or the Old Ducal Room. Halloween fancy dress competitions were held in the village hall. Easter egg rolling and other sporting events took place on the hill at the back of the manse garden. And the highlight of the summertime, the wonderful biannual traditional summer fete held in the manse garden, which always had me believing that we'd step back in time into the 1950s. Every Sunday throughout the summer, the church would host cream teas in the Ducal Room, which became quite famous with locals and tourists alike. The Dumfries and Galloway News once reported that the famous Durisdeer teas are served every Sunday in the kirk over the summer, and it's here that visitors to the ancient pilgrim route can sample the delights of a wide range of home-baked produce by the ladies of the local guild, from scones, fresh sandwiches, cakes and tray bakes, and Mrs. Scott's celebrated cream meringues. During the time I lived in Durisdeer, the church celebrated its 300th anniversary in the year 2000. And Reverend Bill Scott, who was the minister at Durisdeer from 1953 to 2008, wrote a book with the title 300 Years of Worship to celebrate the history of his church and the small village with an incredible history. I've quoted some extracts from his book here and also on my corresponding post to this podcast entitled A Secret Place in Scotland on my website at thebackpackinghousewife.com, and therefore these quotes are credited to Reverend Bill Scott. I'd also like you to know that in the corresponding post on my website there are lots of photos that you might like to see of Durisdeer. There's the village, a video of inside the church, and there's some personal photos too from my own family photo albums. So let me tell you more about my secret place and why it is so very special. Durisdeer is first recorded in the form Durisdeer in 1328. It's likely represented by the Gaelic words dubros, which means a dark wood, and duar, which means an oak copse. So the name would therefore mean the entrance to the dark wood of the oak copse, or, to be more concise, the gateway to the forest. Someone has described Durisdeer as a parish of historic roads and castles. Roads between Clydesdale and Nithsdale and Galloway pass conveniently this way. The Enterkin Pass, well known for its connection with the Covenanters, the walled path and its Roman forge in the gorge, and the Dalveen Pass, which is now the main route and where one sees the old toll house with its white walls. These were the drove roads, and the noise of cattle and sheep passing through was at times so loud that it's recorded that a minister had a cause to complain to the Presbyterian of Penpont. These days, the beauty of the village and the surrounding rolling countryside is unmistakable. And yet you'd never pass through Durisdeer mistakenly, as there's only one road in and one road out again. And it wasn't always that way, because this was once a road well used by legions, that is, Roman legions. Now let me tell you more about the astonishing treasures of national importance at Durisdeer. First of all, there's the Roman fort. Incredibly, just beyond this tiny village of Durisdeer and through a wooden gate into the walled path, in an area once historically considered a strategically important crossing point over the Lowther Hills, lies the remains of one of Scotland's best preserved Roman roads. There's a Roman fort dating back to the Antonine period, AD 138 to 180. And it is of archaeological importance and now considered a national treasure of Scotland. The fort is now in the shape of an oblong earth mound, where only the hardiest of sheep now graze, and the Roman road that skirted the village, leading into the hills, and the site of the garrison that once guarded the pass and regulated the use of the road, is now a dirt and grass track, flanked by dry stone dikes. About a mile south, there are also remains of two much older temporary Roman marching camps, believed to date back to AD 90 to 105. It's incredible how this area, unploughed and undisturbed for centuries, is a window into the past. And as you might imagine, walking the old Roman road and amongst the hills around Durisdeer and beyond is a wonderful way to explore this whole area. The very first mention of Durisdeer Church is found in the records of Kelso Abbey. The church at Durisdeer that we see today was rebuilt on the foundations of a much older parish church, whose first recorded minister is John de Carder in 1394. The original church was dedicated to St Mary and rebuilt by the third Duke in 1699. Durisdeer Church was designed by architect James Smith. It's built in a typical Presbyterian layout with a central pulpit and 3 galleries with box pews. The north aisle, mostly remaining from the earlier church, is taller and more sophisticated and built to seat the Duke of Buccleuch and his family. Throughout the whole time that a church has stood at Durisdeer, it has not only served its humble village congregation, but also the nearby Drumlanrig Castle, and therefore His Grace the Duke of Buccleuch and Queensberry, and the Douglas Scott family, who are the largest private landowners in Scotland. Indeed, the Lady Amabel Clare Alice Montagu Douglas Scott, daughter of the 10th Duke, and her fiancé Dougal were married in Durisdeer Church in December 2020. The astonishing secret about this tiny village lies buried within its small and unassuming church. Because inside Durisdeer Church, behind a wrought iron screen in the Queensberry aisle, is the Queensberry Burial Vault. And this burial chamber, part of the original and much earlier church on this site, holds the 12 lead coffins of the ancestors of the Dukes of Buccleuch and Queensberry, going right back to Isabella Douglas, Duchess of Queensberry, who was the wife of William, the first Duke, entombed following her death on the 3rd of November in 1684. And not only that, as well as the burial chamber itself inside the vault room, there is an incredible freestanding Italian Baroque marble mausoleum, carved in 1695 by Flemish sculptor John van Nost. Yes, you heard that right. A high-profile Italian marble hidden at the back of a tiny church in Scotland. It's an absolute surprise, and it's something of a secret. And more to the point, it's a real treasure. Scotland's Churches Trust describes the marble mausoleum as a riot of swagged fabric, garlands of flowers, urns, barley sugar columns, cherubs, skulls and pediments, all in gleaming white marble. And there are few buildings in which Baroque magnificence and Presbyterian decency are so happily combined. Inside Durisdeer graveyard, there are many fascinating old gravestones. One has a woman carved and a moss-covered skull. There's one for David Scott, who died December the 12th, 1747, and his stone has a horizontal hourglass and crossbones on it, with the symbol of a mallet to show that his trade was a carpenter. Famously, Durisdeer churchyard also has the grave of a Scottish martyr, the Covenanter Daniel MacMichael. Covenanters were those people in Scotland who signed the National Covenant in 1638 to confirm their opposition to the interference by the Stuart kings in the affairs of the Presbyterian Church of Scotland. And in his book, Reverend William Bill Scott tells us, the 17th century saw the National Covenant signed in 1638, and there then followed years of strife between church and state. The martyr's grave against the south wall of the kirk is to Daniel MacMichael, who suffered in the struggle for religious and civil liberty. After the Revolution settlement came years of reconciliation, which resulted in the establishment of our Scottish Presbyterian Church and the Union of Parliaments in 1707. The Duke of Queensberry, commemorated in marble, was known as the Union Duke, for he played a principal part in that historic event. Daniel MacMichael, a Covenanter with a considerable price on his head, whether dead or alive, had been captured and was being transported to Edinburgh for trial. While en route on the 31st of January 1685, at the foot of the nearby Dalveen Pass, amongst the Lowther Hills, he fell ill. And to save the problem of dealing with him, the soldiers shot him dead. A monument marks the spot, and his grave is in Durisdeer churchyard. I have lots more interesting secrets about Durisdeer village. Did you know that Durisdeer is famously included in the 1978 film version of The 39 Steps, starring Robert Powell? And a film of John Galt's Annals of the Parish made use of the interior of the church. The name Durisdeer is also used in Robert Louis Stevenson's novel The Master of Ballantrae. Durisdeer is the setting for part of Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses. And Rushdie was holed up in Durisdeer during his fatwa, and he describes the village as so small it doesn't even have a pub. Astronaut Neil Armstrong, the first man to set foot on the moon in 1969, signed the Durisdeer Visitors Book while he was a guest at Drumlanrig Castle. King James IV, on pilgrimage in 1497, stayed overnight at a lodgings in Durisdeer. The King's Lord Treasurer's account is, to the wife of Durisdeer, where the king lodged, 14 shillings. Pilgrims also pass through Durisdeer en route to the shrine of St Ninian at Whithorn. A modern cemetery to the south of the village of Durisdeer contains the graves of ballerina Moira Shearer, 1926 to 2006, and her husband, author and broadcaster Sir Ludwig Kennedy, 1919 to 2009. In the year 2000, the Duke of Buccleuch gifted Durisdeer a clock, which was placed in the church tower to mark the millennium, and also the 300th anniversary of the church. Alexander Anderson, a local railway poet known as the Surfaceman, who lived between 1845 and 1909, wrote a poem called From a Carriage Window about the views across the Lowther Hills and the village hamlet of Durisdeer. This is the final verse. I saw each and all through the heather, that purple lay spread like a sheet, on the hills that watch over the hamlet, that sleeps like a child at their feet. And Lady John Scott, who lived between 1810 and 1900, wrote a romantic song called Durisdeer, and it has a verse about the old kirkyard. Far up into the wild hills, there's a kirkyard old and still, where the frosts lie ilka morning, and the mists hang low and chill. And there ye sleep in silence, while I wander here my lane, till we meet once more in heaven, never to part again. On my website post, you'll find a link to YouTube where you can find Durisdeer by Lady John Scott being sung by Russell Malcolm. Isn't it incredible that such a small and unassuming place, my secret place in Scotland, tucked away in rolling heather-clad hills, has hosted and protected not only my own family over the years, but kings and dukes and duchesses and pilgrims and outlaws, as well as a famous astronaut and an author in hiding, and sculptors and poets and dancers and songstresses and movie makers. Durisdeer has such an amazingly rich history, and it houses national treasures of Scotland that can still be appreciated today, if only you know where to look. So how do you find Durisdeer? Durisdeer lies 6 miles, 9.7 kilometres north of the town of Thornhill, and via Carron Bridge on the A702. The OS grid reference is NS 893036. Undiscovered Scotland on its website states, Durisdeer is a tiny hamlet nestling in the foot of the Lowther Hills in the Southern Uplands of southwest Scotland. From the south, about an hour's drive, about 50 miles, over the border from Carlisle on the A75 and then the A76 trunk road. From there, the A76 just north of Thornhill at Carron Bridge will take you to the 702 road. From the north, take the M74 and exit at junction 14 to follow the 702 road. Durisdeer is signposted and accessed from the A702 by 2 very narrow roads that merge and go no further than the village itself. As a result, the village is little known and seldom visited. Do you have a special and secret place that you hold dear in your heart? Don't hesitate to get in touch and tell me about it, will you? I'd love to hear from you, because my podcasts are totally focused on not only inspiring you to achieve your own travel dreams in your midlife and beyond, but also in answering all your travel questions. So email me through my contact page on my website, or get in touch through my social media channels. I'm on Facebook as the Backpacking Housewife. I'm on Instagram as Janice Horton Writer. And if you're on Twitter, please do tweet me your travel goals and your questions at Janice Horton. JANICEHORTON. And come and travel with me here on Travel with the Backpacking Housewife podcast. Subscribe and follow for inspiring and informative new episodes each week, in which I'll be discussing ways to plan for and to prioritise travel in our lives and in our new future, in what is set to become a new and golden age of travel.